Yep, I've got quite a few of you who did that. Time, that is the number one challenge we hear. And the T's are still rolling in. What about having to collaborate with multiple personalities? That would be an MP, multiple personalities. Right? We don't mean within one person that you have multiple collaborative partners. A lot of you mentioned that one or thought of that one as well. What about difficult personalities, DP? Yeah, sometimes there may be a few difficult personalities. A lot of you have that one as well. What about administrative support? If that is one that you have heard or aware of, not necessarily in your sphere of influence, you could do A or AS around administrative support. We certainly hear it, that people feel that they're being asked to do something they don't understand what it is. They don't have training. They don't have common planning time. So now, for many gen ed teachers, we hear giving up control. So C, control, that they'll have difficulty sharing and giving up control. These are definitely common problems, are they not? Because you're all noting those. And what about, especially as we move up the grade levels, for our interventionists feeling that they don't have the skills? So that would be an S. I don't know this content. I don't have the skills to be able to teach it. Yeah. So numerous responses for each of these. So now in the chat box, if you came up with something other than what Jackie and I most frequently hear as a challenge, feel free to type it in. What might be challenges in achieving co-teaching other than the ones we've discussed? Some of the tools that Jackie referenced and the assessment that we're going to be sharing with you later were designed to try to overcome some of these particular issues or barriers. Okay. All right, so they have different philosophies, contrasting approaches to teaching, this issue of not enough time. Do we have the resources that we need, a budget, the fiscal resources we can have, personnel like special ed teachers? Sure. So the first three questions deal with rationale for co-teaching. The last one talks about what might be challenges, because we want you to know we understand these challenges exist. And again, when we get to those tools, hopefully they can help to alleviate some of these challenges. So why co-teach? Benefits to you personally and professionally, benefits to the children, benefits to the system, and IDEIA, ESSA, and YOU. IDEIA is our federal special education law, passed in 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. It holds a place in education history, but it also holds a place in civil rights history. Prior to the passage of that law, we had millions of children with disabilities who had no right to receive a public education. And we get a law that says that these children are entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment with maximum access to non-disabled peers. So that law requires that we bring supplemental supports, aids, and services to support children in gen ed whenever possible, rather than sending a child to a more restrictive setting. What is co-teaching? It is a legally available supplemental support, aid, and service that can be brought to support a child in gen ed, rather than sending them to a more restrictive setting. So we know that we have 45 years of research and experience that has demonstrated that children with disabilities, including our duly identified learners, do better in gen ed settings than they do in resource rooms, special class, and special schools. They have greater academic, social, and communicative growth in the gen ed setting. 45 years of research and experience, and it holds true across every category of disability, every age, and every level of support need that children and youth might have. And it's not just when they're in school, because the US Department of Education follows graduates of special ed into their adult life. And they have concluded quality of life for an adult with a disability will increase in direct proportion to the amount of time they spend in gen ed settings. What do they measure for quality of life? What would you measure? Happiness, friendship, self-esteem, employment. Every one of those variables increase in direct proportion to the time they spend in gen ed settings when they're with us. That is our special ed law. And now we move to Every Student Succeeds Act, which is our current version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Now, it still requires us to be accountable for the learning and the progress of all subsets of children. Its predecessor, No Child Left Behind, wasn't all that popular with many in education because it was poorly funded, narrow in its view of accountability, negative. But No Child Left Behind did some very important things, because prior to its passage, every year we were sending more and more children someplace else and excusing them from taking a test so that we wouldn't lower our scores. So we got to claim to be effective by hiding evidence that what we did not work. And for the first time in American history, we were told, no, you are accountable for the learning of all students. What expectation do I have for a learner if I never assess the progress? What expectation do I have for myself and my professional responsibility if I'm discarding data? The other thing about No Child Left Behind, it did a lot to forward co-teaching at middle and high school because it required that students be taught by teachers who were highly qualified in the content that they teach. What a concept. You want your children to master the content, make sure their teachers master the content. However, simply placing a learner with a master of content is not a guarantee they're going to be successful. But if we mirror masters of content and masters of access together, all the learners in that environment should be able to benefit from their shared skill set. So we have a legal rationale. Do you have any other rationale?
Well, certainly, and actually you have already touched on it. As Rich said, in the 2004 reauthorization of IDEA, which is IDEIA, they summarized the research. And so at this date, and 45 years later, this is exactly the language that is in the reauthorization, and as Rich summarized it so well. At all grades, students with disabilities can be educated effectively in general education environments where teachers, support personnel, and families collaborate. Additionally, the outcomes are not just in academics, but also in the social relational domain, which is so very important at this very time. Access to engagement with same-age peers who do not have disabilities and who are not English learners. Here in California, Schwab Learning actually did a research study with 16 California schools that had committed to 3 things: inclusive education, co-teaching, and differentiation of instruction. And then a number of years, they again looked at 22 elementary, middle, and high schools. What did they find? Again, as in the reauthorization data, increased overall student achievement for all subgroups. Because you had support personnel in the classroom, there were decreased referrals for those more intensive special education services. We didn't have to make kids eligible in order to get those services. They were already there to support eligible students and other students. Because there were more adults in the classroom, voila, fewer behavioral referrals and disruptions. Less paperwork, again, because we didn't have to go through that process necessarily to get those resources for IEP eligibility. Interestingly enough, increased number of students became eligible for gifted and talented services, and teachers, another benefit to not just the students, but the adults. Teachers reported feeling less isolated, feeling happy. Who would not want that? So what about those approaches? So we have research rationale, legal rationale, benefits, culture. So what is it that we're talking about?
Okay, now you don't achieve those benefits, those outcomes by simply putting two people in a room. Even if you put two people in a room, they learn to play nicely together, it's still not enough. They've got to be employing student-centered practices. They've got to be able to move in and out of these approaches. So we're going to look at each of them in terms of their unique features, their potential advantages, and what might be a disadvantage, to be aware of the cautions so we use and not abuse. So again, you may want to be taking notes on that overall graphic organizer. As we look at the first, and it's called supportive co-teaching. And this is a very easy one to visualize. So we have two more people in the room. One of them takes a lead to instruct the large group, while the other one or ones is out and about, right? Out and about among the students. So you've got a lead and you have a support. Said another way, you have a sage on the stage and a guide on the side. Who is in lead and who is in support can shift, can change over time. And in fact, we would encourage you to do that. Many of our co-teaching teams begin here as the co-teachers get to know one another, the children, the curriculums, and the routines. There will always be a time and a place for supportive, but it should ultimately become the least utilized of the four approaches. If you look at any of the research that is critical of co-teaching, saying there isn't much of an effect size, look for the description of what they're doing. It is supportive co-teaching. Again, time and a place, but our goal has to be to use this the least. So in supportive co-teaching, the one in support might be providing individual support, academic, behavior, facilitating transition. They could be collecting data. They can be getting information, feeding it back to the teacher. So what do you think are the benefits? And what do you think might be cautions with supportive co-teaching? In a moment, we're going to ask you to go to the chat box. And we want to start with benefits. So what are the benefits of supportive co-teaching? One is in lead and the other is in support. If you can think of a benefit, we would invite you now to use that chat box. Struggling students will get support faster. Sure, right? We've increased the ratio of instructional personnel. You get more monitoring done. That person out and about sees a lot of things that I don't see if I'm doing the lead for the whole class. They're getting support, modeling of strategies in real time. We might be able to come up with additional scaffolds or supports. Real-time data collection. You have a teacher at times when you're talking about, you have the one with the greater content knowledge able to lead. That's particularly important if it's new content and one member of the team doesn't have the curriculum content mastery, because new learning is like wet cement. It's easily damaged. Monitoring specific support, right? Nice. So we know that there are advantages. Students get support, as you said, in real time, so they don't have to sit there and get frustrated as things go along. Someone's talking about reduced planning time. Clearly, of all the approaches to co-teaching, this is the one that will require the least amount of planning. So that's good when you don't have time, or you have time but you don't hold it sacred. What about the flip side of this? What are potential cautions that could be associated with the use of supportive co-teaching? What might be a problem? What might go wrong? Back to our chat box. You may have a professional in a role of a glorified babysitter. Someone's skills may not be used. You might have a partner feeling inferior. Some students may become overly reliant on the person providing support. They don't see, oh, absolutely, they do not see the supportive teacher as the real teacher. We've heard students say this, right? Yep. So you can breed resentment among your co-teachers. Over the years, we have heard hundreds of interventionists say, I hate co-teaching. And then we say, don't explain what you do, and it's always the same thing. The content teacher is teaching, and they're out and about going from student to student, basically checking, is everybody on the same page? And they'll say things like, do you really think that this is why I had to go to graduate school, to be able to do this? Is this the best use of my time? And the answer is no. No, no, no. It cannot be the only thing that you do if you're another professional. So if I go into a room and let's say we've got a special educator and a gen ed teacher co-teaching, and I see the special educator in the supportive role for the entire time I'm in that observation, I'm trying not to be critical because I don't know the big picture, the video that they live. But in that little period of time, I'm wondering, is this what this person does all the time? And if they were to tell me, yes, it is, then I'd be asking, where is the special education? Special education is much more than just going around, oh no, next page, over here, right? Where's that specially designed instruction? On the other side of it, you can get resentment from the gen ed classroom teacher. They're gonna, how many times have we heard comments like, first of all, you can't depend upon them to show up on time. And when they do show up, they always bring that damn coffee mug with them. And they set it all over my room, leaving coffee ring, coffee ring, coffee ring. I've got the kids settled. They come in and actually are disruption. Hey, that's a great game. And then before class is over, they're gone again. How is that So you can get resentment on either side of this. So I think you did a good job with these cautions. Let's look at your list compared to our list. So you referred to something similar to this. They're becoming overly dependent. So we worry that sometimes particularly when we have paraeducators, but sometimes when there's a special educator or English learning specialist or an occupational therapist in a room, that they become Velcro to individual children. And we have heard from typical children that there is a barrier to their desire to socially interact with children if there's a hovercraft vehicle around that child, meaning an adult. You know, sadly, I can tell you that Jackie and I have been in classrooms where we never see the classroom teacher interact with some children. Those children are still being stigmatized. They are being given a different status. It is clear to them and everybody else they're not a real member of the team, of the classroom team, community. Remember, our definition is shared responsibility for all. So you cannot have only one adult interact with children who need support. So if a child needs support, we would encourage you to try to facilitate peer-to-peer natural support first. You two talk it over, see if you're in agreement, I will be back. Some children will need more than that. They will need adult support. And that is the case. We have to make sure that we're rotating who's providing that support. In terms of other cautions, you've got it. Students do not see that supportive person as a real teacher. You've got this one. All the expertise may not be used. One could be locked in that role of discipline police. You, as I mentioned, can have resentment among the members of the team. A reminder that this one should be used the least of all the approaches. So we're going to share with you this clip. And this is from a statewide project that I've been involved in the state of Kansas for 6-7 years. We're basically now, I think, in 120 different school districts across Kansas. So this is talking a little bit about supportive co-teaching, but who are the partners in this? Related videos, I don't want, oh, there it is. Now let me stop because you're probably not seeing that screen. Okay, this comes up on YouTube. I'm always fascinated with what comes next on these. You can never have control of that. All right.
Students continue to learn if a teacher. Co-teaching is the pairing of two teachers together in one classroom that share the responsibility of lesson planning, delivering instruction, and reflection. It's evidence-based instructional learning, bringing two subjects together to mesh as one. While one teacher delivers instruction, the other walks throughout the classroom, monitors students' progress, and answers any questions. It started out as a way to enhance students' learning, but has now become a way to ensure students continue to learn if a teacher were to be quarantined due to COVID-19.
Not only the two teachers know exactly what's supposed to go on, what's expected, you also may have a paraeducator who knows what's expected. So we're not completely minus the teacher. We may have to make adaptations, but the learning continues.
The school system says it has given them the chance to close any learning gaps students may face due to the pandemic. At 6, we'll hear from two teachers that are currently working together through co-teaching. Here for you in Montezuma, Keisha Batman, KSN News 3.
All right. So, can you use the chat box? Were you able to pick up it? Clearly supportive, but do you know who the members of that co-teaching team were? Did anybody pick it up? It was 2 gen ed content teachers that they were mostly talking about. So that it was, let's say, English language arts with social studies or whatever. And so they shared the students they co-taught. But then they were talking about some of the combinations that they have are teacher and power. And they went to a rationale that who would have thought we'd be hearing that? And they're still doing some COVID or face-to-face instruction. So if one is quarantined, the others there knowing the students, so life goes on. Let's take you into a 5th grade classroom in Wheeling, Illinois. And so you're going to meet Jennifer and Amy, and you'll see an example of supportive co-teaching.
All right, so just like any other Monday, we're going to start with sharing something that we are thankful for today. So you're going to find a partner. You're going to touch 2 tables, find any partner you want, face your partner, and share the way we've been practicing, please. Okay? Ready, go. Find a partner, touch 2 tables, something you are thankful for.
Thankful for being in school.
Now we're going to touch 2 walls and find a new partner. We're going to read the objectives for English today on the board with our partners. Ms. Costa's pointing them out to you. Now touch 2 walls, find a new partner, and read the objectives together. Find a new partner after we touch 2 walls. Read the objectives together. Stand where you can see them. Joshua in front of you, stand where you can see the objectives. Who would like to read one out loud for us? You're gonna have to translate como resultado de esta lección. Who can do that? Alison? Okay.
Analyze
Analyze.
Language patterns in English and Spanish. Use academic vocabulary in discussions.
In discussions. Okay, good job. We're going to switch one more time and do the same thing again with a different partner. Okay, so this time we're going to walk around 2 tables and find a new partner. Go, rapido, rapido.
You know why we do the bridge? The bridge helps us to learn 2 languages. We find the similarities and differences between Spanish and English. We can speak and write better in 2 languages. We can analyze new words in 2 languages. In conclusion, when you speak 2 languages, you can have a lot of opportunities in life, like better jobs and opportunities to help others.
Thank you, Jason. Maritza. Sí, pero ¿qué hacemos durante el puente? Eso es la verdad, que vamos a tener más oportunidades en la vida, pero ¿qué hacemos durante el puente?
Buscar semejanzas.
Buscar las semejanzas, muy bien. ¿Okay? ¿No, Jorge? Jonathan?
Podemos hablar y escribir mejor en dos lenguajes.
Vamos a hablar y escribir mejor en las dos lenguajes. Sí, muy bien. Now, before we start the bridge, remember that we have some sentence frames up front for you and your partner to use while you are discussing the words, so you can be speaking in sentences in English while you are working on the words. You have an assigned partner, and Ms. Costa and I will each be watching a couple of the different groups to keep an eye on how we're doing and to take some notes on how you're doing, talking about the language and talking about these look for rules that we've been practicing.
Alan and Maritza, you will be partners. Actually, you can stay right.
Okay. So we had a virtual conversation about how they were doing it. And then we had those two folks, that was pre-COVID. And we're going to be moving into the next approach. And they certainly provided us with a nice segue into that.
So when they said they were going to be moving into the next segment of the lesson, where they would be putting students into groups, they were talking about parallel co-teaching. So what is parallel co-teaching? Parallel co-teaching is when two or more people work with different groups of students. And so you will see in this picture that there are groups. There are also some additional groups off to the side that don't have an adult with them. You see these three people working with three of those groups. And the instructors may rotate, and the students may rotate. Or students may be doing independent work where they know what the routine is with a partner or two others. Again, with the co-teachers having their eyes across the crowded room so that they are continuing to monitor. The great thing about parallel co-teaching is that there are so many faces of parallel co-teaching. We call them faces or variations. And so you will see in your handout on page 9 a description of 7 parallel co-teaching structures. We are also reproducing it here on this slide, just in case you may not have that page open yet. And so we're going to give you all the time you need, 2 minutes, to read and digest these descriptions of the 7 phases of parallel co-teaching. And afterward, we're going to be giving you 2 polls, so you'll be ready because we'll be asking you about these 7 approaches. While you're reading them and digesting them, would you think about which of these have you seen used by your teacher, or perhaps you've used when you were teaching, and which of these could still be used in the virtual teaching learning world? So again, 2 minutes, read, digest in preparation for a couple of polls. We'll be your timekeeper. Enjoy.
Okay.
All right. So a fair amount of the first 4 co-teaching approaches, learning style focus, maybe not as much, but maybe some in the future of your co-teachers. Lab monitoring down there, but definitely something that some of you have seen. So let's go to our second poll.
And that's the first one. And then we can go to 2.
Okay, we asked you to think about which of these structures you could still use in your online learning environment. So which of these parallel co-teaching structures do you still use or could be used in your virtual learning environment? Which could you still use? All right. Yes.
Yeah, fast responses. We've got a quarter already,
Yeah.
a third already.
Okay, keep voting. You have until November 3rd. No, you have 50 more seconds. We'll keep it open.
So almost 60% have seen one or more of these, or believe one or more of these could be used in virtual environments. And we'll call the poll.
There you go. Yep. So, you know, we've talked with a lot of co-teachers. Actually, Rich has been virtually coaching teachers across the country the last few weeks. And what they've told us that they actually, as you have voted, that they all can use any of the parallel variations in their virtual world. You know, with all 7 approaches, and your co-teaching teachers and paraeducators, they can co-host and join different breakout rooms to monitor and intervene, to question, to provide direct instruction and guided practice. Clearly, we see that experimental or lab monitoring had a lower percentage. We wanted to comment about that. Clearly, monitoring of lab groups change in both the COVID virtual brick and mortar environments, because you know there's social distancing that won't allow the same kind of hands-on experiments with shared materials that students formally employed at their lab station. So likely, you know, your co-teachers will be doing more demonstrations, or are doing more demonstrations if you are engaged in this, and students will be doing more observing. However, students clearly can still have virtual stations, lab stations in those breakout rooms, as long as each of the students has access to the materials they need. And co-teachers can still parallel monitor lab groups by dropping into those lab breakout rooms. You know, it does look and feel different, but yeah, it still can be done.
So I want to share with you something I saw last week when I was doing some of the observations virtually and debriefs. So this was in Colorado, and it was a high school. And they have a bit of a hybrid where half the students come on Monday and Tuesday, or Monday and Wednesday, and the others come Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday is virtual for everyone. And yet what the co-teachers did is that they each took a group of 6 to 8, and they were in a different physical space within the school building. And they were doing Socratic seminars on To Kill a Mockingbird. But each of the students had another classmate who wasn't there connected virtually to them. So there were different pieces, questions, information. They'd confer with in a breakout room with their partner, and they would represent their point of view as well as their own, and they would turn the computer so people could see it. It was just a really fascinating way to watch. They did parallel, and they involved both the students who were home virtually as well as those that were there face to face.
Thanks, Rich. And you saw some good examples of all of them. So if you can share some of your fresh observations, we really appreciate it. So potential benefits and cautions of using parallel co-teaching. There are both, as there are with all 4 co-teaching approaches. So let's focus upon benefits first. Take a moment, if you would, think about the potential benefits of co-teachers working with smaller groups of students within a classroom. Think about it. I'll give you an opportunity to respond in a moment. Co-teachers working with smaller groups. Yeah, we're getting some responses here. More individualized support and adult time for students, more instructional time. There you go. Focus on individual needs, differentiation, yep. So actually, I'm going to pop up here some benefits, and if your benefit shows up, would you type a B as I read through each one so you can focus on learning styles? All right, so let's take a look at those benefits and some other higher level to meet students where they are and provide appropriate support. Yes, 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 and yes. So benefit, we reduce the student-teacher ratio. If you thought of that, feel free to type a B. Yeah. And with that reduced student-teacher ratio, what can you do? Well, as you already identified, you can differentiate instruction, the third one, individualize, tailor, meet students where they are. If that's one, type of B. Also, the second one is a real favorite for speech and language pathologists who try to see if their students are generalizing some of their skills. They can rotate through groups and in the natural context of the classroom, take data and see if students are generalizing what they have been taught. In those small groups, as you identified, we can monitor students more carefully, we can collect that data, we can give personalized feedback to the students. And the fourth one, because students are have the opportunity to have more airtime, and because we can support them in their collaborative partnerships and in their cooperative learning, they have the opportunity to practice those small group social emotional skills, those cell skills that we're so concerned about. And they have the opportunity to use and be prompted to use that academic language. Like we saw in the first video, they can be supported to use complete sentences, one of the best practices for our English learners, particularly those who also have IEPs. For the adults benefit, now, unlike supportive co-teaching, everybody gets to use their expertise. Is that a benefit that any of you thought of? Yeah. And again, because everybody's in the instructional role, both can be viewed as equal and as genuine co-teachers by the students. Lots of potential benefits, lots of Bs. Are there any potential cautions? Well, of course there are. There are cautions for all of the co-teaching approaches. So you see there's a chat icon there. So here we want to encourage you to respond to this question in the chat box. Think about it. Picture 2 or 3 instructors now working with or monitoring across the crowded room, subsets of the entire class. What could go wrong? What do we have to guard against when we're grouping students in this way and working in this way? Does anything come to mind? Type any. Potential on dependence on one adult. Okay, that is a caution. Can become 2 separate classrooms. If we want to make sure that we don't have just one adult working with one group of students and the other with the other. Here we have to make sure it's not mom against dad. So we'll be looking at the planning piece of this. Again, another not getting to see all kids, but staying with some of the kids. Okay, students may begin to think of grouping as separate parts of one class. Okay, we have definitely a theme. Can understand the needs of each adult. Let me pull that over so I can read the whole thing. The IEP and the strategies that work or individual situations known. So we have to make sure that all the people who are working in the classroom are familiar with the characteristics of all the learners. That's a caution. All right. Very excellent. All the cautions that we hear about. And since you brought it up, we'll go to this one first in terms of, well, actually not this one first. actually, this was one of the ones that was greatly identified. One big caution has to do with that homogeneous grouping that you did identify over and over. Liu and colleagues examined the effects of ongoing homogeneous ability grouping on the achievement of students. And they found that the students who were relegated to the perceived low ability group dropped, look at this, 23 percentage points in achievement with negligible benefits to the other students. Now, what school or community would ever risk this type of outcome? Do we homogeneously group? Certainly. When we engage in targeted, differentiated concept and skill building, we homogeneously group, absolutely. And, however, for the vast majority of the day, we want to heterogeneously group students along all those dimensions of diversity: gender, perceived ability or performance, English proficiency, cultural and linguistic background, strengths, interests, so that we do not get that, what we call the bluebird versus crow stigmatization phenomenon. You know, the kids know, and the adults can get stigmatized too. Now, if Rich is the only one working with one group of students, whether it's high performing, low performing, or one group of any students, the rest of the students won't necessarily view Rich as their real teacher. And, you know, we certainly don't want that to happen.
So did she just say that you can never group students for remediation and extension? No, of course not. No. Right? She gave us some parameters that are very important. We never group our students together because they share a common label, because everyone who has that label is not going to be the same. And being placed in a group is not a life sentence. It is fluid, it is flexible, and we're constantly shifting who's working with them and which students are in these groups. We group, database decision making.
Thank you for that complimentary example.
That comes next.
That's coming next. Just a little preview. So as Rich said, you know, not only do the students potentially get stigmatized, so do the adults. So we need to make sure that we change it up. Are these, and then you see there's over and under monitoring of cooperative groups or of our labs. So sometimes you may see co-teachers just following one another and really interrupting students rather than giving them the time to dialogue and problem solve. So we want to make sure in our planning that we talk about who's going to monitor which group, and make sure that we also get our eyes on all of the groups so that we do truly are perceived as all students, teachers. The virtual world question. Do we still need to guard against number one in the virtual world, over relying upon homogeneous versus fluid, flexible database decisions? If so, type yes. Is that still a caution in the virtual world? If so, why? Yes, yes, yes. You can type a yes or a why. Do we still need to make sure we're mindful of this? Yeah, we see some yeses. And it is particularly important for us to tend to this. As you indicated, we could still get a class within a class unless we are planful in our grouping. One teacher only working with select students, is that still a caution? Why yes, if that's still a caution? You see it? Any whys? Yeah.
We have in the COVID era, in virtual settings, we have seen some of that happen where our English specialists and our special educators are doing parallel just with the students that are, quote, on their caseload. And so they're going to get, it's returning to what we know from 45 years of research and experience did not promote the best academic, behavioral, social skill gains for them. So it is definitely a big caution.
And of course, over and under monitoring. True in both brick and mortar and in the virtual world. So we have another video for you. As Rich cues it up, I'll tell you a little bit about this. this is parallel co-teaching, and we selected this particular example because we want to highlight some of the co-teachers' behaviors. In this video, you will see Megan, a 4th grade teacher, and Max, who's a learning coach. And they are co-teaching a science lesson in a school.
Right there. Gloria and Nathalie.
No.
Melissa and Jackie.
We know that that's a different co-teaching group.
No.
So Megan, 4th grade, Max, learning coach. Science is the content area. This is in Wheeling, Illinois, which has a very large population of students who are learning English and who also have IEPs. So as you watch, what do you detect that the co-teachers are doing? What behaviors do you see? And if you have page 9 open with the 7 parallel faces, which parallel variation or variations are they using?
Okay.
We're going to set the timer for 2 minutes. So you have 2 minutes to explore on your own. Okay. And that is going to start right now.
And moving forward, you will be kind of collecting ideas. So think about all the ideas that you'll be listening to right now. That's very important because you'll be taking those great ideas for the next activity, okay? So be really good listeners.
And before we start, if you get stuck and you're not sure like what external structure it could represent, we have our poster back there. So you can refer to our structures to help you if you need to. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and go.
When I have little, this is, when I was looking at this, I was thinking like about an eye because it was round, and I know that animals need eyes to see. So I was, this object can represent the external structure of an eye. This structure can help the organism survive by food because the eye can help it find food.
Remind me, what structure did you say it would represent? The eye. Okay, so it would help protect, and how would it help it protect?
By looking and seeing predators.
Okay, interesting. Ready, set? Okay, boys and girls, if you can once again put the container in the center of your table. Okay, awesome. Mr. Ryder, I heard a lot of good conversations from the groups that I visited.
I did as well.
Right, and it looked like everyone was using a sentence frame too, and even if you started your sentence, you remembered, oh man, I gotta use that. So that was really great. Raise your hand if you heard a new idea that you hadn't thought of before from your group members. Okay, good, almost all of us. So now what we're going to do is we are going to put you in your animal groups so you can hear even more ideas from other people not at your tables.
All right.
Get you back to the PowerPoint.
Okay. So we told you that we selected this to highlight some of their behaviors. So, question. Did you see anything in their hands while they were working? Well, first of all, which of the parallel approaches does this represent, do you think? Feel free to type in the chat room. Which of the parallel approaches, what were they doing? They were in the science category, yep, cooperative group lab monitoring. So actually it was both. Well done. While they were parallel monitoring, what was in their hands? Feel free to type again. What did you see? Yep, they had clipboards. They absolutely did. So the reason we selected this one is to show that purposeful monitoring and data collection, with each of the co-teachers focusing on half of the groups, so that they do not over-monitor or under-monitor. And then, of course, they will switch at some point so that they get their eyes on all of the students. So in the virtual learning world, can we still monitor and collect data? And the answer is, you already told us, yes, when we were taking a look at the approaches.
Nice. Okay. So we have looked at 2 of the 4 approaches, and we're going to give you an opportunity to take just a 5-minute stretch break here. Let's do it like Jennifer and Amy did it. So we want you to get up, we want you to move around, make sure you walk around a table at least once and you touch 2 walls, and just give yourself a little movement break here. All right, when you return, we will move to complementary and team. And then we, of course, will share the tools and we will go into the frequently asked questions. It's 1:20. Yeah, it is their time. We're in Vermont, so it's 1:20. Yeah, there. So anyway, we will see you, now it's 1:21, so we'll see you in 5 minutes. 10:20 there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right?
So it's 10:20 there.
Yeah, we wait to see you till 1:20, things are gonna be bad.
That would be,
You'll be in the teacher group.
A long break.
All right, 10:21.
10:21, so we'll see them at 10:26.
Right. Okay. So, welcome back. And again, we want to thank you for your high rate of participation, being interactive. So we're going to turn our attention to the 3rd approach, complementary co-teaching. And it's called complementary co-teaching because about once every 5 minutes, you turn to your co-teacher and you say things like, I like your new haircut.
Oh, thank you.
Nice shoes.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Rich, I really appreciate how you've learned how to navigate between PowerPoint and our co-teaching platform and YouTube videos. You're just so fast, so you make it look just seamless.
Well, thank you. So there you go. You and your co-teacher exchange compliments about once every 5 minutes.
Oh, wait, that's not an I.
Oh. Yeah, that kind of compliment would have an I after the L, but we have an E. So it must mean something else. So complementary co-teaching is that one person is still taking the lead. You know they're driving the content, but the other person does something that augments it, supplements, complements it, right? So you have one person who's driving that content and the other's doing things to make it more accessible. Who leads and who complements doesn't have to be a static event. You can alternate those roles as well. So there are a variety of things. You know, if I were co-teaching with someone who's not as knowledgeable about co-teaching as Jackie is, but they said, well, what's the major goal? And I said, well, the first major goal is that they understand the unique features, the similarities, the advantages, and the cautions of the 4 approaches. And let's say they develop the graphic organizer that they gave you. And prior to my beginning instruction, they pass it out, explain its use. And while I'm communicating that information, they're filling it in and it's being projected. They're modeling the note-taking. So there are many, many things that we can do to facilitate access, right? So one delivers content while the other complements, enhances, clarifies, expands, supplements, illustrates. They have different analogies, different examples, restate, paraphrase, sentence frames, anchor charts, pre-teaching, idioms, figurative language. So, right? Again, additional examples, word bank, color coding. One may be explaining, that is the content, and the other is modeling the steps of a process or the use of a particular tool. So, what do you think might be potential benefits and potential cautions with complementary co-teaching? Let's go to our chat box again, and let's start with benefits. What's the benefit of one delivering content and another making it more accessible? Certainly is a way to support student learning. Okay, we can model for students. What else? Think of those two co-teachers, think of their roles, think of their skill sets. How is complementary in any way beneficial? Provides enrichment. They're monitoring and adjusting in real time. People are both using their skill sets. Masterful and effective strategies, promising for students. They see, very good, they see both of them as real teachers. Reminds you when couples tell a joint story and there's seamless interaction. Not that it was Tuesday, no, it was Wednesday, but they've got this flow. Nice, very nice. So let's think about, well, let's go back for a minute. So these benefits that you've identified, they both get to use their skill set. They're both seen as real teachers by the students. We're more likely to ensure student success. Are those benefits, would they hold true if we did complementary co-teaching in a virtual environment? Y for yes and for no. Can we still have one, there you go, delivering that content while the other's doing things to make it more accessible? Sure. It is going to require planning, clarification of roles and responsibilities, but that's true in brick and mortar, not just the virtual world. For co-teachers who are unaccustomed to complementary, Jackie and I often suggest to start, plan a lesson and together talk about 3 to 4 times where you think something complementary would be really beneficial to some or all of the students. And so then if I'm leading and that complementary behavior occurs, it's not a surprise to me. We don't want you to get to a point where you're going to script every moment, right? But to get you started, of course. All right, now cautions. What could go wrong? What could go wrong? They could get locked into, I'm always leading, you're always complimenting. We could get competition. There might be a bit of a interruption of flow. We could talk over each other. For some students, especially if they're unaccustomed to it, it could be distracting. So, yeah, we could not be on the same page. Too much adult talk. I think you've hit all the ones that are important to us. Here's one. Not monitoring as much, because before I was in supportive, and then we kind of did divide and conquer. We each had our groups, but now I've made it to the main stage. I've been waiting so long. Let me tell you, there's a lot I want to say. And so we get too much adult talk. We are fond of saying whoever does the talking does the learning. Whoever does the talking makes connection. We've got to facilitate student-to-student discourse. And when we're busy co-presenting, we may forget to monitor those students. In supportive, when we were out and about, close monitoring. When we broke them into small group, we had that close monitoring. It takes time, it takes practice for us to get into a flow with this where it doesn't feel as if we're stepping on each other's toes, for sure. And for people, it involves oftentimes role release, trusting, letting go, giving another person an opportunity to share that stage. It is a journey, without a doubt. Some people make that journey at a quicker pace than do others. So do these cautions also apply in a virtual environment? If so, type Y. If not, type N. Now, we certainly have seen all of these approaches used in virtual environments many times. And yet, it's fascinating to us that the benefits and the cautions for the most part remain the same. I would agree with you. Leah, about, we miss some of the body language. And so again, it's having those courageous conversations about how do we assure that we don't do too much teacher talk? How do we assure that we have that balance? So we're going to share with you a video of complementary co-teaching. Now, this is going to be a 7th grade math class. And we're in San Diego. This is at Mann Middle School. And at Mann Middle School, you will meet Stephen Santana and you will meet Stephanie Brown. Stephen is the math instructor and Stephanie is the special educator. As you meet them, they are relatively new. They're about 5 to 6 weeks into their co-teaching journey. They neither have co-taught with anyone else prior to this. They teach one 7th grade math, one 8th grade math together. There are 38 students in the room who speak 6 different primary languages. 7 students have IEPs, and at least 2 of them would be duly identified learners. Now, as you watch this video, you have a job. Using your chat box, I want you to identify everything that you see that is complementary. Okay? What are the complementary actions, behaviors that you see?
Answer either one. What is measurement or what does it mean to measure? And Mrs. Brown will write these down. And I would prefer that you write them down as well so that way we get all these good ideas out. So I see a lot of good participation. I saw Marche's hand up. So let's go Marche, Chris, and then Penny.
Our team will agree that length, a measurement is to find length and width.
All right. Who are we hearing from next?
Did you know this? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, she just took the initiative. I didn't have to call her. She was ready to go like that.
Because she's paying attention.
I know.
Great. Love it. Okay, so finish your thought, Penny. Line up.
And see how long the object is according to the ruler.
And see, can you only use a ruler?
Nope.
No, you can use anything else. That has measurement on it.
Your finger. Let's try to come up with 5 things you can use to measure something with now. A ruler is one. You said a finger, Randy. A cup. A stick.
Pencil.
Paper. Yeah. And so would it be fair to say that anything is a measuring device?
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, a ruler is the most traditional, but we could use anything. I could say that if I were to use pens, I could say I'm about 30 pens tall. You would be able to reference that. Open circle on -3.
I have another question. Why are these all positive?
And Kevin, if I need the numbers that are greater than -3, which direction? To the right. All of our thoughts. So how, I like how Michael's written nice and big. How far are you away from 0? So basically, when we say how far, we're dealing with a what? When you say how far, you're dealing with a, Randy? Distance. And it's a distance that is associated with what number? What's the number that we're always trying to get to? 0.
So 0 is kind of like our home base.
Yes, it's like that get out of jail card for the.
Playing Monopoly. Yep, Monopoly connection. So this
say. I'm looking for a volunteer to raise their hand. Michael, what does this say? No. What does this say?
absolute value of good.
Okay. What does it mean, Michael? Good, Michael. Good. And so, Michael, let's answer that. So if you need help, you can use your number line. You can use the number line in the back. Or you might just know it. How far away, Michael, is -2 from 0? Is 5. Good.
So what does this equal sign say? When you say that sentence, this is the is.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch, and I'm going to ask you, what does it mean? So, John, go ahead and say it first, and then we'll take that and we'll make it to the class.
How far from 0? How far?
But what?
5 is from 0.
So, say it again. Let's hear John, Jesus. Let's hear John.
How far is 5 from 0?
Good. So that's what it means. So how far is 5 away from 0? Your turn.
How far is 5 away from 0?
And then we should all know that. How far away is 5 from 0?
All right. Okay. Number 1. Okay, so let's start right there. Go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
Okay, so we can go ahead and list them out. Mrs. Brown will take them. What is a number that you found, and you worked with your table if you needed to, that was less than 3 away from 0? Joey, give me one, please.
-2.
-2. Now, if we agree, we'll accept it. -1.
Nicely done in terms of all the ideas.
You answer either one. What is measurement, or what does it need to
He got excited that he had a
measure?
chance.
Mrs. Brown will write these down, and I would prefer that you write them down.
He got excited that he had that opportunity to share with you. So, yes, thank you for all the responses that you typed into the chat box. And let's get us back to our PowerPoint. I want to use that chat box. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to type in it, but we're going to ask you to refrain from hitting the return key. All right, so if you think of the lesson from Stephen and Stephanie, see if you can answer my question. Type it, but don't hit return. We're doing a waterfall chat, so we'll see everybody's answers come cascading in at the same time. What is the number that we are always trying to get back to? You know the answer to that, please type it without hitting return until you're prompted. What is the number we are always trying to get back to? A key point in that lesson on absolute value. All right, the number we are always trying to get back to, hit return. Look at you, such good learners. Now think about it. Stephen simply says it, right? The number you're always trying to get back to is 0. If you're an auditory learner, that'll work. But Stephanie does many complementary things to drive that point home. Does she not write it in those big, beautiful, legible letters? The number you're always trying to get back to is 0. And then what does she do? She puts a box around 0 to focus attention. And then she comes up with an analogy. It's like trying to go to home base, home base. She steps out of complementary for a moment, moves into supportive. As she goes over to a child's paper, she draws something. That child had a number line above the 0. She drew a house. So that child has a concrete visual representation, home base, right? They made a reference to something I had done at the beginning related to get out of jail in Monopoly for the students. So several of you noticed that she was providing a visual scaffold. What does it say? What does it mean? The first child asked a question. If you had seen her, it was deer in a headlight. Stephanie says the answer, that young girl repeats it. For other students, as she's listening, she's deciding, do they need support? So for some, she might point to what does it say or what does it mean? And for some, you just see her nodding her head, right? Several of you noted that they're moving around the room. So they're taking care of that monitoring piece. Now, you may or may not have noticed that above the whiteboard, there was chart paper. Those are resources related to that lesson that Stephanie made and posted. You may or may not have noticed the green bulletin board with the oak tag. That is a word wall. She is pre-teaching that math language, right? And so it gets posted. Later, as they work together, they begin to take a lot of the vocabulary, have it in English, but also in some of those other 6 languages that the students are speaking. So, question, why for yes and for no? Does Stephanie look like a real teacher in this clip? Yes or no? Definitely. Does Stephanie have a skill set that is being used to facilitate learning for all students in that class? Y or N? Sure. We know her skill set. Stephanie was a grad student of Jackie. She was a grad student of mine. And if we went into a room and all we ever saw her do is supportive co-teaching, we'd be putting our heads through the wall because it's a terrible waste of that skill set. To do what they did, would that require planning? Y or N? You just go in and wing it? Yeah, it wouldn't have looked like that, right? So as you move across that page from supportive to parallel to complementary to team, as Jackie said earlier, the amount of trust, communication, coordination, planning will increase to do it and to do it well. So thank you for that.
Which brings us to the 4th co-teaching approach, team co-teaching. You know, at the beginning of the webinar, we likened co-teaching to a committed partnership, a marriage, if you will. So for team co-teaching, we would like to add another analogy. Team co-teaching is like a dance. It's like a couple who dance beautifully together. When they dance, it's complex, it's sophisticated, it's intimate. And if they hadn't been together or if they had a new partner, they might actually step on one another's toes. Now, Rich and I, we dance. We're married, but we also dance.
You don't have to be
They're not
married
mutually
to dance.
exclusive, yeah. but we've never danced a tango. No, that's the tango right there. So, Rich, what do you think it would take to dance a tango?
Well, looking at that picture, I'd say flexibility.
Yeah, flexibility, definitely. Anticipating one another's moves, maybe.
And that comes from practice, rehearsal.
So practice.
Otherwise, I'll bet many people, when they learn to dance a tango initially, are stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah. And probably some cues to one another to make it look seamless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so team co-teaching is like a tango. It's definition. It's 2 or more doing what one did alone and doing it better because 2 heads are better than 1. Duties, responsibilities are distributed equitably. In other words, it's fair. We may be doing different things, but we've come to that point where it feels good. And we have symbols of equity. Symbols such as papers and notes that go home have both of our names on it. If we're in a brick and mortar environment, we would have both of our names on the door. We'd have 2 big people desks. So importantly, in complementary and team co-teaching, co-teachers are providing instruction to the whole class. However, in complementary co-teaching, it is evident, it is clear who is driving instruction and who is adding to, who is complementing. In contrast, In team co-teaching, you can't tell who's in what official role, who is the classroom teacher, who's the interventionist, who's the paraeducator. It's seamless, it flows. It's as if two people or more are doing what one person did. Are there potential benefits and cautions? Absolutely, as there are for all of them. Benefits, per the definition, there's equitable distribution of duties. It feels good. Two or more people are doing what one person does and doing it better. Both, as with parallel and complementary, both get to use their skill sets. So both are viewed by the students as real co-teachers. But because in team co-teaching, both are providing content instruction and both are providing access, there are a couple additional benefits. So let's say it's a special educator and a content teacher. So the interventionist, the special educator, gains content mastery, but has that built-in coach. They're exchanging roles. And similarly, the content masters are developing their access skills with that built-in coach. So in summary, both are gaining knowledge and skills as they try on each other's roles and they release their expertise to one another. Question, do these benefits apply in the virtual distance learning environment? As with complementary, you said yes, so they apply here as well. And cautions. Large group instructions as in complementary, so the cautions are the same. We have to remember to monitor, to not get so enamored with our instruction that we forget that we actually have students in the audience, similar to what we saw with Stephen and Stephanie, where Stephen actually stood in the middle of the room during monitoring. You can do the same with team. Teacher talk, remember whoever does the talking does the learning, whoever does the talking make connections, so making sure we have equal or more student talk and being mindful, having some cues so that we are not stepping on one another's toes.
Yeah, one of the cleanest examples I think of for team would be if Jackie and I were co-teaching and we want to put you in partnership activity. And we modeled, role played as if we were those students. In that role play, we would be exactly equal in that period of time. And our goal isn't that you do team because it's better. Our goal is you move in and out of all four approaches. However, with support of ultimately the one you use least. So
we do have another video for you.
This is one of our favorites.
Yes. So we will be looking at Erica and Christian. They have in this context, and it's a brick and mortar context, 50 kindergartners, not 15, 50 kindergartners, and they're in Wheeling, Illinois, where we visited before. So as you watch, is this team co-teaching?
Well,
why is it team co-teaching? We'll get there. There we are.
We will.
Any best practices that you see?
So are you seeing a screen that has a young woman, Megan? Somebody type a Y for me. I want to make sure the right screen is. Okay, good.
This is fourth grade science.
Oh, they don't get to see that one. They get to see Christian and Erica. So I was distracted. Maybe some of them were distracted. So how many kids in this class?
How many kids in this class? If you can remember, type it in the chat box. 50. Could you use a co-teacher?
Oh my gosh. All right. There is music and there's TPR, total physical response movement. So feel free to sing along, feel free to move.
Here we go. Seasons of the year. Here we go. Seasons of the year. Here we go. Seasons
leaves changing colors. Here comes the fall with the climate getting cooler. Here comes the fall with the leaves falling down. Here comes the fall with the wind blowing loud. Here comes the fall with the leaves changing colors. Here comes the fall with the climate getting cooler. Here comes the fall with the leaves falling down. Here comes the fall with the wind blowing loud.
Here we go.
Let's go. Oh, seasons of the year, here we go. Oh, seasons of the year, here we go. Oh, seasons of the year, here we go. Oh, seasons of the year. Here comes the winter with the ice and the snow. Here comes the winter with the freezing cold. Here comes the winter with the days getting shorter. Here comes the winter with the nights getting longer.
Here comes the winter. So we've been talking about winter a lot, right? And we've been singing this song a lot. So there are some words that we want to teach you in English that you already know in Spanish. So hay muchas palabras del invierno que ustedes ya saben. Ahora vamos a aprender lo que significa en inglés. ¿Ok?
Entonces, la primera palabra es con mucho viento, ¿ok? ¿Qué es el movimiento de mucho viento? Pues, no pueden contarme, necesitan mostrarme. Hágalo, ¿ok? ¿Cómo así? Entonces, repítenme, mucho viento.
Mucho viento.
Muy bien, y entonces, necesitan mostrarme. Hay mucho viento, está soplando tan fuerte.
Mucho
Okay.
viento.
En inglés se llama windy, ¿ok?
Pero parece a un nombre que tenemos, right?
Oh, sí, parece muy similar.
Wendy, sube la mano. Her name is Wendy, but is it the same Wendy? No. This is Wendy. Show me Wendy.
Es igual que mucho viento.
Mucho viento. Wendy.
Wendy, muéstrame.
Muéstrame. Wendy.
Oh, está soplando.
Muy bien.
Ok, ¿cómo se dice la palabra otra vez?
Wendy.
Windy.
Guantes. Guantes. What? I'm sorry. What? Okay, I need someone to raise their hand to tell me because I'm old. I can't hear very well. Mareli. Gloves. That's good, but there's another word for gloves. And we read this book. Just a little tip.
I'm going to draw a picture.
Andy, what do you think it is? Mitten, you are correct.
Very good.
Look at the drawing that Mr.
Is there a
Joe just
difference
did.
between mittens and gloves?
I think so.
There is.
What do you think?
Gloves are, let's see. Does anybody know the difference? Can you help me with my drawing? Yes, Edward. Say that again for me, please. Necesitas voltearte. One is mittens and one is gloves.
What do you think the difference
¿Qué es la diferencia entre las dos? Oh, qué bueno. Está mostrándome. Uno tiene, ¿qué? Uno tiene dedos, ¿ok? Y la otra, ¿esos son, qué? ¿Mitones o guantes? Guantes. Guantes mejor. Y esos son, buen ejemplo, Mrs. Farias. Trato hecho.
Things you can find in the lost and found, huh?
¿Qué son esos?
Trato hecho. Good
¿Esos
job.
son mitones o guantes?
Good job.
We love sharing that with high school teachers. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I teach older kids. Well, what they have to remember, kids used to be that cute, huh? I am muted by host. No. Could you hear me that time? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. I got a message saying I was muted. You never want me muted.
We're not going there.
Okay. Share. Okay.
Oh, okay. Not yet. Not yet.
Okay,
Not yet. Not yet. No, not yet.
I gotta get up here.
Not yet.
They can't see this.
Okay. So we had Erica and we had Christian. So in the chat box, if you thought, and well, one of them is the kindergarten teacher and one is a Spanish bilingual teacher. Okay. So Erica and Christian. If you thought that Erica, that she was the kindergarten teacher, type E. If you thought Christian was the kindergarten teacher, type C. If you have no idea, type a question mark. Yeah, so actually, Erica is the kindergarten teacher and Christian is the Spanish bilingual teacher. And those of you who put a question mark, that's the very point of team co-teaching. You get to that point in team co-teaching that it's as if they're one person. It's so fluid. I think that those question marks mean they probably met the criteria of effective co-teaching. So now we have 3 polls for you.
Okay, was our first one.
Here we go. So context. Now that you're familiar with all 4 co-teaching approaches, we'd like to know which co-teaching approaches your school personnel have used. So for the first, if you would time travel back to last year before March closing, and your educators are teaching in those pre-COVID classrooms. So are you there? Given these contexts, which co-teaching approaches did you use if you were teaching, or did you see your teachers using in that brick and mortar learning environment? What was going on in your context? Which co-teaching approaches were being used?
About a third of folks noting that they've seen one or more of these. We have some for every approach.
Yeah. Again, this is a multiple choices. It's obvious.
And we'll give it another 15 seconds and we'll call the poll. And so some of you haven't had co-teaching yet, I would assume.
Yes.
Okie doke, we're gonna close the poll.
Okay. So we see that there has been each of the 4 co-teaching approaches somewhere and predominantly supportive at this point. Then again, we recognize that there may be needed an NA category for some of you. So now let's take a look at another context. So our second question. We are now in virtual, or we're in virtual environments. So that context, which co-teaching approaches have your teachers used or you've seen used in the virtual learning environments, whether it was last spring or this fall? Which have you seen used, either last spring or this fall? Okay. Keep on voting.
We like watching them come in. It's
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
like a
being
horse race.
And we'll give it another 15 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
And we'll call it.
So we've seen some parallel, complementary, and team, more supportive. And we have a video actually of a virtual learning lesson that we thought would be instructive. So Rich, tell
and
us a
you
little bit.
figure out which of these approaches it
Yeah.
is. All right. So we've got to get to stop the share, stop sharing you.
Hello, class. I
Hello.
know that we've talked a lot about main topic and main idea.
She's
but
so
after seeing our
eager.
assignment,
She's so eager. She got there before me. All right. So now I got to share that screen. This is a second grade class. Obviously, it is virtual learning. And we'll back it up just a little bit. All right, and we see our two teachers.
class, I know that we've talked a lot about main topic and main idea, but after seeing our assignment that we put on bigger or smaller, we saw that we needed more practice with that. So we will be reviewing main topic and main idea.
Yes, and as you can see, here's a picture of what our anchor chart was like in the classroom. And the topic is 1 or 2 words about the whole text. So an example might be a book about small and big animals. And the main idea is a statement that tells the most important thought about the topic. Now, this is usually found where, Miss Via?
That is usually found in the beginning or at the end of the book, usually within the first couple of sentences or the last couple of sentences.
Okay, so then we're going to show you guys how you're going to go back and look in a book to find the main idea. And then the supporting details are facts or examples that support or describe the main idea of the text. So
And I really love this anchor chart because it just is a really good illustration for you to remember what that looks like. So main topic, that big cloud, that broad overview of what the whole text is about in just 1 or 2 words, whereas the main idea is the umbrella, as we can clearly see, and that is with 1 sentence. And I just want to repeat this for us to remember that it tells us what the important thoughts about the topic. And then those raindrops that are sprinkling down, there's usually so many supporting details that are details that support that main idea.
So, and bigger or smaller, Miss Via, should we read the first page or 2 and then the last page or 2 to find our main idea?
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll read the beginning and then I'll let you read the end, okay?
Okay, and I'm just going to get something that I think might help us as well while you read that.
Okay. Lots of living things are bigger or smaller than you are. I'm going to reread that because I messed up. I made a mistake. And smart people, go back and fix them. Lots of living things are bigger or smaller than you are. But
And we'll jump a little bit further into their lesson.
you know what? I'm thinking about the main idea, Miss Via. I'm thinking those raindrops, they have to support it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The supporting details. And I think about the first page, this lemur.
I was just looking at that page too and thinking about all the different animals and examples that we were getting in the book that are bigger or smaller than us. So do you think we should include that as our first detail?
I do.
I totally agree.
And we'll jump a little bit further in.
Oh, you're fine. Is there anything else you think that our class would need to know as we reviewed main topic and main idea?
I don't think so, but the next time we do this activity, I would love it if you guys have forgotten what it is, and any videos that we post of us reading a story, go back and pause on the beginning and the end to help you decide what you think the main idea of the text is.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't get things the first time. A lot of times I don't get things the first time. I need to listen to it again or reread it again, and that's okay.
It's absolutely okay. And you can always go back and reread it yourselves. Like,
okay, so let's stop sharing that. And if you go to the chat box, could you identify which approach or approaches to co-teaching that was? If so, did you see any supportive, type S? Did you see any parallel where they each had their own separate subgroups, type P? Did you see complementary where one led and the other added to it, did something to make it more accessible? Or T, moments where they were exactly equal? S, P, C, or T, please. So let's go back here. So most people picked up complementary and team. Yeah, and we could say there was just a little bit of supportive, but nice. So again, they're second grade that they're working with, and they post videos like this for the families to use and work with their children at home as well.
So we said 3 polls, so here's the third one. Oh, here we go. Now you have or you will return to face-to-face instruction with all of the precautions that COVID requires. So given this new brick and mortar context, another question: which co-teaching approaches, okay, can't see it yet. Okay, which co-teaching approaches can be used in the COVID era face-to-face learning environments? Which of these can be used in the co-teaching COVID era face-to-face environment? Again, multiple choice survey.
Looks like most of them are telling us that all 4 can be used.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll give it another 15 seconds.
Okay. Keep on voting.
And let's end the poll.
And the results are, most of us see the use of all approaches in our COVID face-to-face learning environments. And so the conclusion is that whether in face-to-face COVID or virtual, or whether or not your teachers already have tried any of these approaches, your educators and your students can use and enjoy all 4 co-teaching approaches. And as you've already told us, the benefits and the cautions remain the same, whether in face-to-face or virtual environments. And so to remind you of the 4 approaches, the cautions and the benefits, on pages 24 and 25 of your handout, we provided you a summary of the 4 approaches with their associated benefits and cautions.
So what was encouraging about your poll is that so many of you had identified complementary and team, and previously had told us that mostly what you have seen in pre-COVID and in virtual was supportive and parallel. So this is great because you're poised to support people to expand their use of all the approaches. Why is that important? Well, let me share with you some research results. I told you that I've been involved in the state of Kansas for 6-7 years in a statewide co-teaching project. We're up to about 120 districts, but when this data was collected, we were in 105 districts. And in these districts, we provide training and co-teaching for administrators and co-teachers. We also help them create coaches. And we're going to have another session on December 10th, if you're interested in this performance-based feedback and coaches. And so what did we find across these school districts? They had increased inclusion, increased student achievement, and increased use of student-centered best educational practices. So you can see from this slide that co-teaching was implemented across many subject areas, but the majority of it tended to occur in language arts and math. And we believe that that's because we have our greatest high stakes pressure there. But also if we think about our learners with disabilities, that primary areas of eligibility are language arts and math. So we didn't know what we were going to see, but we wanted to look for student-centered practices tied to research. This is going to be beneficial for students. So our observations are anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. So if the co-teachers only did supportive co-teaching, you see about 40% of those observations we saw, right, that they were being explicit teaching academic and behavioral procedures. But if in that same observation, they added one of the other two, or three rather, parallel, complementary, and team, you see how it jumped. If they did 3 approaches, you see what happens. And then if they did all 4, moving in and out of them, 97% of the time, they were explicit in teaching the academic and behavioral procedures. And you know what we discovered? That same pattern held true. The more approaches used in a single period of time, the greater the use of desired student-centered practices like providing prompts and cues. Specificity of feedback. Notice it, name it. You see that same pattern. Checking for understanding, not any questions everybody understand, but asking students to say, do, demonstrate something that shows that they are understanding. Right? Look at the pattern. If you think about teaching through a variety of learning styles or multiple intelligences, the more co-teaching approaches used, the more multiple intelligences were tapped into in terms of their explanation or ways they allowed students to show what they knew. Positive behavioral support, catching them being good, same pattern. So, this is really interesting, and we're happy that we have administrators to share it with. Does training make a difference? If neither teacher were trained, all we saw was supportive. If one member of the partnership were trained, we saw just a little bit more. But if both teachers received training similar to what you're receiving today, 96% of them moved in and out of the various co-teaching approaches.
Powerful data, Rich. At the start of this webinar, we asked you what might be challenges in achieving co-teaching. And Rich identified the most commonly named challenges, and you concurred with at least these. So there will be challenges ahead. But the good news is that educators, just like the ones that you are supervising, have invented and are using tools that are effective in managing the expected challenges of collaborating and teaching with another person. So you don't have to invent these, they already exist. So let's examine some and see what you might want to add to your own toolbox, the toolbox of your co-teachers, and to the toolbox of anyone providing performance-based feedback to the co-teachers. At the end, we'll ask you which ones you think would be the most valuable for your co-teaching teams at this time. So keeping with the committed partnership analogy, we know that marriages or committed partnerships are likely to be more successful if future partners have certain prenuptial conversations. So we offer you the prenuptial conversation tool on page 10 of your handout. Now, here are the topics that veteran teachers say are essential for them to discuss for a smooth transition into a new marriage, if you will. And if you have the luxury of those co-teachers having those conversations before they start co-teaching, that's fabulous. But if you are, or your teachers are already in a partnership and they haven't had a chance to have these conversations, perhaps it's even more important. Rich Villa, any advice on how partners can structure this prenuptial conversation?
Sure. So what we basically suggest is that you come together and you, for each of these items, you identify what are the things you think you need to talk about. So take time for planning. So under time for planning, you're probably going to say, when do we meet? Where do we meet? How long do we meet? How often do we meet? Etc. You would do something similar for each of these items. Refrain from starting to discuss your answers to those questions or items. We want you to create the entire agenda before you get into that conversation. Why? Because in every relationship, some people are more dominant or talk more than others. We want everyone to feel respected by seeing their items have made the agenda list.
So thank you. So follow that advice if you're sharing this with your teachers. And you'll see on page 11, and on the handout, some sample conversations that you can provide your co-teachers. And on page 12, you'll see some of the questions under each of these categories, starting with time for planning, that veteran teachers say that they have posed to one another. The important thing is that your co-teachers need to pose their own questions in each of the categories, because it's their real co-teaching relationship and it's their real questions. On pages 13 and 14, you'll find the our likes and dislikes when working with other team survey. Now, this can be used by any team, IEP teams, grade level teams, leadership teams, and partnerships such as co-teaching teams. So notice the instructions. Indicate which items you enjoy doing when working with others. When all team members have indicated their preferences, discuss your team's summary profile. What are the strengths of team members? Given these preferences and skills, what issues or challenges should be easy or exciting for your team to address? What kinds of problems might you anticipate among team members? We know lots of new co-teaching teams who love this tool because it gets them talking and learning about each other's collaborative teaming strengths and non-preferences. So you can avoid a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, and conflict by using this tool.
Yeah.
Next tool.
The sooner you have the conversations, the better.
That's
But
right.
as Jackie said, it's never too late to start. In fact, we've mentioned we want you to revisit all these tools. So you've had some of these prenuptial conversations. Now it's time to create your prenuptial agreement. So in your packet on page 15, you have this role and responsibility matrix, or as we call it also, the nuptial agreement tool. So the way this works is you come together and you identify the responsibilities that must be met for the students in your co-taught class. So we're giving you some samples here, but you certainly can modify that, add, delete, etc. Once you've agreed upon the list of responsibilities, we suggest you go away from one another. And from your worldview, you use the code. P is for primary responsibility, S is secondary, E is equal responsibility, I is input. And if you're working with a paraeducator or student co-teachers, you might want to add an NA. So you develop the roles, the list of responsibilities together, you go away from each other and code it. Then you come back and share. Do you want to find out if you're on the same page? Do you want to find out if maybe you need a marriage counselor? So here's another example, and this is one where both the special educator, Ms. Brinkley, and the paraeducator, Ms. Bartolo, were supporting two English language arts teachers. And if Ms. Brinkley, let's say, was with Ms. Hendrickson, Ms. Bartolo was with Ms. Cole. If Ms. Brinkley were with Ms. Cole, Ms. Bartolo's with Ms. Hendrickson. And so as a team, they filled it in terms of the responsibilities. So you have their perception of everybody's roles and responsibilities.
Paraeducators. A number of the most frequently asked questions right now that we've been getting regards the role as paraeducators as co-teachers in virtual learning environments. So as you know, our paraeducators are invaluable supports to our English learners, providing specially designed instruction for students with IEPs. So in a virtual learning environment, paraeducators can be essential supports as co-teachers. So we offer you 2 resources from our research and writing on paraeducators as co-teachers. Now on page 18 and on the left here, you'll find this inventory of paraeducator preparedness. This can be modified and used to assess how well paraeducators at your site have been prepared in a number of areas, and co-teaching and virtual instruction and support can be added to this inventory. And then you can use it to plan professional learning for paras or anyone really who has a similar role. And on the right, and on page 19 in your handout, you'll see the paraeducator position description, which likely is similar to your para job description. Again, it too can be used as starter to identify and then where they are and where the gaps are in knowledge and skills in order for paraeducators to support students in co-teaching, whether in virtual or brick and mortar environments.
Okay. So there is another tool for you, and it is on page 20. And we borrow this from our California colleague and friend, Wendy Moravsky, and use it with her permission. And she developed, if one of you was doing this, the other could be doing. This is good for brand new teams. This is good when you're working with paras, right? And it's not a bad thing to revisit. And of course, you can come up with additional items and different things that you can do. The thing is that all of these fall into one or more of the co-teaching approaches. Should also note that some of them are our roles in teaching and some are our roles in planning, because we can be in supportive, parallel, complementary, or team planning as well as in co-teaching. So let's just look at a couple. And if your answer is you think that it's supportive, you would type an S. P for parallel, C for complementary, T for team. So let's take that first one. If one is lecturing and the other is modeling note-taking, is that S, P, C, or T? Type it in the chat box, please. One is teaching, the other is modeling note-taking. Yeah, many of you are identifying that it is complementary. The one who's lecturing is driving content. The other's making it more accessible by providing those notes.
All right, let's skip down to the third one. So if one is checking for understanding with a large heterogeneous group of students, and the other is checking for understanding with a small heterogeneous group of students, this would be an example of which? Supportive, parallel, complementary team. We see some, yes, parallel. They each are working with a subset of students in the class. Remember, parallel is the only co-teaching approach that is not whole group. Well done.
All right. So let's jump down some more. And we're going to come down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What do I want? 8. Let's go to the 8th one. It starts with considering. So these teachers in planning, one is considering differentiation, modification, and enrichment needs, and the other is considering differentiation, modification, and enrichment needs. S, P, C, or T? It is T because they're both doing exactly the same, right? You could do parallel where you could divide and conquer. I'll take the lead for this part of the lesson. You do that. Let's then come together and share. Nice. All right, one final one. Go down 2 more 3, 4, what do I want? My eyes, old people eyes. It's another planning one. Okay. The one that says creating basic lesson plans. So one is creating the basic lesson plan focused on standards, objectives, and content curriculum. The other is providing suggestions for modifications, accommodations, differentiation for our learners. Is that S, P, C, or T? They are good. Yeah, it's complementary. The one is driving, here's the basic lesson plan related to the standards, the objectives, and the others providing ideas for the scaffolds, the supports that are going to be there to support our students. Nicely done.
Yeah. So again, as Rich said, this is a great starter tool to give your teachers, give them some ideas as where to begin. Now, the next set of tools have to do with reflection. So to introduce it, we have this cartoon. After spending 10 minutes each afternoon in front of a full-length mirror, Alan still isn't sure why self-reflection is so important to good teaching.
One of us thinks this is funny, and one of us doesn't.
It's funny.
So if you think it's funny, type F for funny.
Oh.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Well, what if they don't like it?
You're going to use it anyway.
Yeah, I am. I won the coin toss.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, well, self-reflection, reflective tools. All right, well, yeah, I won the coin toss. So this is introducing our reflective tools. Here we go. We offer you on page 21 the co-teaching tracking matrix. You see the co-teaching approaches across the top and the days of the week along the left-hand side. Now, this tool can be used 2 different ways. For example, at the end of the week, co-teachers can reflect upon the approaches that they actually used, and they might notice that they had a nice mix of all 4 approaches, and so they can celebrate how facile they've become. Or they might notice that they've fallen into a pattern of, for example, using only supportive. Signaling they need to be more planful in using the more impactful of the co-teaching approaches and changing it up. The matrix also can be used as a general planning tool for the week, where co-teachers kind of lay out which approaches they want to use on various days. So the next tool is for certificated partners, credentialed teachers. And you'll notice it's called the Are We Really Co-Teachers Self-Assessment, and it has a Likert scale of 1 to 5, with 5 meaning always and 1 meaning never. Again, co-teachers could do this separately and come back together, or they could do it together. You'll notice that there are items that relate to the things that we've been talking to you about in the areas of planning, implementation, reflection. Also, their culture of collaboration, and then at the end, ways in which they can be models and supports to others. This can be used probably after, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks after co-teachers have been together, so they have some data on their performance with one another to reflect upon. And we recommend using it periodically throughout the year to set goals, to celebrate where they've gotten 4s or 5s, and to, set goals and celebrate. You'll see that we have another one for when certificated personnel are working with paraeducators. The items are very similar, except that you'll notice that in planning, the certificated person, the credentialed person, is taking the lead as they are required to.
Nice. So that's sharing a lot of tools, and there's still more to come, but that's sharing a lot of tools with you kind of quickly. So we're going to pause and give you a moment to go back and look at these tools. And we're interested in which ones you think would be most beneficial to your co-teaching teams at this time. So you see A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. So you would start in your packet on page 10 with the prenuptial conversation Then you have our likes and dislikes, the roles and responsibilities, the nuptial agreement, the job responsibilities for Paris that Jackie shared. If one is doing this, the other can be doing, which you just did a great job with. The co-teaching tracking matrix, are we really co-teachers? So we'll give you about 90 seconds to flip through. This time we're going to do a waterfall chat. So which of these tools could be beneficial to your co-teachers? And so type them in, but don't press return until we prompt you, okay? Oh, we have lots of responses. Okay, well, we're not going to do a waterfall. You're doing it as you identify them, so that's fine. That is fine. Many of you like the co-teaching tracking matrix. I think that's really great, especially if you want to get them out of that stuck in supportive. Where do we want to be by Thanksgiving? Where do we want to be? Many of you have identified multiple or even all. Your teams may find different tools helpful. And again, it's good to have them go back and revisit because answers change over time and we may forget what we've agreed to. Nicely done. Do want to remind you that, as Jackie mentioned, on pages 24 and 25, you've got the similarities, unique features or differences, advantages, and cautions associated with each of the four approaches. All right.
So lesson planning. Rich and I have noticed that co-teachers tend to plan lessons in time blocks, and this co-teaching planning graphic organizer that you'll find on page 28 of your handout acknowledges this and offers a lesson planning structure for guiding conversations about what co-teachers will be doing in each of these blocks. So in column 1, the co-teachers discuss what they will teach in a block and how they plan to teach it. Prompted by questions in column 2, co-teachers ask one another and discuss what learning differences do our students experiences. So what differentiation is needed that co-teaching supports. So differentiation is built into the conversation. Then in columns 3 through 5, the co-teachers consider which co-teaching approach or approaches best supports the differentiated instruction that's needed in each of these blocks, and specifically what each of the co-teachers will be doing in their respective roles. You saw Stephen and Stephanie in their parallel their complementary lesson on absolute value. And so this is an example on page 29 of how they use this graphic organizers to set up that absolute value lesson. And you'll see, you saw the actual complementary part, but you see that they built in supportive at the beginning when the students were launched into the lesson, and they also, you see that after their complementary instruction, they went to parallel application. Okay, now we are finally to the frequently asked questions.
Including that one that several of you have asked in the chat box about access to the videos. We'll get to that, I promise.
So on page 26, if you want to take notes, we have the questions listed there. They're not in the order they're on the slide, and that's okay. So question number 1, how much planning time is needed? At a minimum, what is the amount of purposeful planning that co-teachers need per week? Well, co-teachers have consistently told us that they need at least 45 to 60 minutes of purposeful planning a week to get beyond supportive co-teaching, which is the least beneficial of the co-teaching approaches. This, of course, can and will be supplemented by synchronous or asynchronous use of technology, such as, your shared Google Docs or whatever platform that your teachers are using. And they can flesh out their lesson plans, develop their advanced organizers, and any other note-taking tools. But generally, they say purposeful 45 minutes to 60 minutes per week.
No one has ever said they have all the time they need.
No.
How do we schedule and use our resources for co-teaching? That is your responsibility. Individual co-teachers should not be left with trying to piece together a schedule. Whoever's got the ability to manage that master schedule, to make sure you're giving them common planning time as well as co-teaching. There are many different ways people are organized. None is perfect. All have different advantages and disadvantages. In many schools, co-teachers are assigned primarily to language arts and math that we talked about earlier. In some schools, they're assigned to grade levels. In some schools, they're, particularly as you move up into the higher grades, they're assigned to a department so they can begin to develop content expertise in that particular curriculum area. So in our book on co-teaching, there's an entire chapter that's devoted to administrative logistical kinds of support, including various scenarios for how we organize those people. You basically need two sets of data to work from. Who is available to co-teach? Two, which children need to be in a co-taught class? Not every child with an IEP, every English learner, children who are duly identified need to be in a co-taught class. Which ones do? And they have to become a priority in scheduling.
Who can co-teach? Well, we've actually talked about this with you throughout the entire webinar. What is true that whoever is co-teaching, we want to make sure, per that Kansas data that Rich shared with you, that all partners have the opportunity to learn about what co-teaching is and what the 4 co-teaching approaches are. We are very excited that our related service personnel are beginning to co-teach in the classroom. So we provided you an article that I wrote with the head of the speech and language department at my university, Cal State San Marcos, a guide to co-teaching for the SLP, a tutorial. Speech and language pathologists have such incredible resources in terms of language supports, particularly in the primary grades, but at all grades. So you have this as an article for you to share with your related service personnel and for you to read as well. And who else can co-teach? We want to emphasize the importance, as Rich mentioned earlier, that students are often the untapped resource. We've trained students all across this country to be co-teachers. So don't forget, when students are engaging as cooperative groups, as peer tutors, perhaps as a trained co-teacher, they too can join us in co-teaching.
Okay, nice. It is so exciting when you watch them. When I left my school district in Vermont, and that was a long time ago, but up to 90% of all elementary students were trained peer tutors. We've seen middle schools where 125 out of 825 students are trained cross-age peer tutors. And as we mentioned, we've had up to 50 high school students in a single high school co-teaching.
Yeah. What percentage of students with IEPs should be in a co-taught classroom? Or stated otherwise, what percentage do we not want to exceed in terms of percentage of students with IEPs in the classroom? Well, ideally, it would be the natural proportion. In other words, the percentage of students that actually have IEPs within the school district, and nationally that's 10 to 12%. So you know what your natural proportion is in your district. We know that you do not have all the resources to have that percentage in the classroom. So we know that you have to do some clustering. So we say, and no author has said that more than 1/3 of the students should have IEPs. We recommend that as a best practice. Rich, why?
Why? Well, it goes back to that Liu and colleague research.
Yeah.
If you take away the academic models, the behavior models, the communication models, you're going to depress their achievement. We've met a lot of teachers and co-teachers who work really hard. We've seen scenarios where they're 50% or more of their kids who are English learners, special ed, duly identified, and they're working hard, but they're working within a structure that will depress rather than increase achievement.
Here's a fast question. Will co-teaching eliminate pull-out, alternate, or supplemental instruction? No, but it certainly will greatly reduce it, especially now that we have taken a multi-tier system of support approach to preventing failure for all of our students. And co-teaching, parallel co-teaching, is essential for us to implement that multi-tiered system of support. Next question. How long should co-teachers stay together? Well, it's a marriage, so it's for life. Actually, that's just I'm joking right there.
You're what?
I'm joking. I'm joking. Are there advantages to co-teachers staying together? Obviously, in a good marriage, you know, all those good things that happen by spending time together and exchanging roles and learning how to do that dance really well. But, you know, at many, you know, that's one of the reasons that many of the secondary schools, we have special educated attached to departments so that they can get that content depth and get to know one another. But sometimes we deliberately actually have co-teachers leave one another. And for example, in a lot of elementary schools, we have looping, where the ed specialist actually follows the students into the next grade and deliberately leaves their co-teaching partner for another partner. Are there benefits to that? Certainly, you know, as an ed specialist, I carry my knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, and we can transition more smoothly. So ultimately, the decision as to who co-teaches and for how long is an instructional decision that's based upon the needs of the students.
Okay. So here's one that we're interested in your response. Oh, this isn't the one that I want your response. Do co-teachers need to have the same level of content expertise to effectively co-teach? We hear this oftentimes, particularly as you move up the grades. But our belief is, you know, if you are struggling to get it, you can be sure that there are students in that room that are struggling to get it. So what has to happen for you to be able to have access for this, right? So they don't have to have that same level of content expertise. A lot of those complementary behaviors can be done without having that same level of content mastery. However, your content mastery will improve over time, just as your colleagues' ability to facilitate access should improve over time. We look at this as a win-win-win situation. Win for each of our co-teachers, win for the students. The one that we want to solicit an answer from you is number 8. Should co-teaching be a voluntary act? Not asking, is it voluntary, but asking, should it be voluntary? Y or N, yes or no? Should co-teaching be voluntary? Fair amount of responses. Some yes, some no, but it looks like we have more no's so far than yeses. Well, we want to be honest with you that people who train and write in co-teaching have differences of opinion. Some say, yes, they should be voluntary. Others say, no, it should not be. Others say, go ahead and mandate it, but they're still making a choice of how they will behave in this relationship. So, you know, I was mentioning the Kansas project, and in one of our end of year surveys, we discovered that half of the teachers were in marriages of choice and half were in arranged marriages. At the end of a year's time, we could find no statistically significant difference in terms of their positive attitudes towards co-teaching and their co-teacher. So I think it's a matter of the kinds of support that they get along the way. So in terms of whether or not it should be a voluntary act, we can best explain our position with the malaria example. Several years ago, I contracted malaria. Malaria is not something we're going to catch in the United States, right? And so if you go to a doctor, they're unaccustomed to looking at these symptoms and thinking that it's malaria. I had contracted it out of country, came back. I had an incubation period before it really took off. It was the middle of cold and flu season. I thought that's what was going on for me. But I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And so I was brought into the hospital. They came in at 4 o'clock in the morning to say, we figured it out. You have malaria, you have tuberculosis, and your immune system is collapsing. Well, thank God I did not have tuberculosis. My immune system didn't collapse, but it was greatly weakened from this long battle with the malaria. So I laid in that hospital. I was there for several days in isolation, and I kept, thinking about a lot of things. But do you think I ever once thought, they just said they were going to call CDC, Center for Disease Control. What will I do if the folks at CDC are unwilling to communicate, collaborate with my doctors? What about the pharmacy? They're calling, they want to change the medicine. What if the people in the pharmacy do not volunteer to work with my doctors? What about the nurses and doctors on this shift if they don't want to volunteer to work together or share information with the next shift? I thought about a lot of stuff, but I never thought about any of that. Why? I had a right to expect their collaboration in my diagnosis, my treatment, and my follow-up. Why should our children and families have any less right to expect us to collaborate, to do the jobs that we are paid to do? We love this profession. We meet lots of wonderful people, but we have yet to meet that teacher by himself or herself that can meet the diverse psychological and educational needs of the children sitting in front of them. Collaboration is essential. Given our increasingly complex, diverse learners, it is essential to our success, and more importantly, to the success of our children and youth. So another question, of course, is how can administrators support co-teaching? And that would take us back to the beginning on page 5, where Jackie was speaking about vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action planning. So we had thought maybe we would have enough time to have you categorize the 11 actions that are listed there during this in a breakout. But it now becomes optional home fun, extension, and enrichment. Read the items and see if you can identify, is that something that forwards the vision and builds consensus for it? Is it something that brings us to skill development? Is it an incentive for some or many? Is it a way to think about how we reallocate our resources? And all of that needs to be part of a plan, an action plan, and communicated to others. So one of the questions that we saw several times was, can you have access to the videos? So the only ones that we can give you access to would be the 2 YouTube clips. So in the beginning under supportive, it was a news story from Kansas where the co-teachers were interdisciplinary, 2 core content teachers. We can share with you, because it's also on YouTube, those 2 second grade teachers who did the virtual complementary and team. The others belong, in terms of copyright ownership, to Corwin Press. We trained the teachers, we worked with the teachers, we were there for the filming, but they hold copyright. So if I jump, if I jump here, there are a variety of resources, of course, that relate to this. And these are all Corwin Press. Now, those video clips come from a PD resource kit. The resource kit accompanies or goes with the Guide to Co-Teaching book. There's video DVD footage for every chapter of the book. And so we only showed you some of those DVDs. So they're doing something where they're changing platforms or whatever. So I'm going to put my email in this chat box. And if you call them and say you want those resources, they're going to say no. However, when we call them, they say, okay. What they typically do is there's a subscription, and it's good for a year, and it's about $400, $500, I don't know. But it gives you PowerPoints, it gives you training materials, it gives you access to all those DVDs. So I have that there. We have just a couple of minutes left. I did want to add one more thing about people being put into relationships and being asked to co-teach and maybe being reluctant. The research on teacher change, teacher attitudinal change tells us the majority, I want that to go to everyone, that the majority of teachers do not support major innovation until after they've had a positive experience with the practice. What we have to do is make sure that they have a positive experience, that they get training, that they get performance-based feedback, right? There is one more resource that we wanted to point out to you. Pages 30 and 31. Here's an instructional observation tool that we often use when we're looking at co-taught classrooms. A check mark or a blank doesn't mean good or bad. It just means what did you see in that period of time. That tends to inform our debrief sessions. We'll have some practice with this in the December 10 webinar that we do related to coaching co-teachers, and show you clips of the teachers. We can practice using this, and then looking at the conference, modeling for you the sequence that we have found to be most effective with our co-teachers. So a lot of our co-teachers actually use this and talking about what do they want to bring into their lesson, and talking about, well, I typically do this, you do that. Maybe we begin to exchange our roles. We have a few minutes left. If there is a question, would you please type it in the chat box? We don't want you to leave with a burning question not addressed or answered. All right, well.
All right. All right, I guess it's time for thank you. Thank you so much for your active participation, for staying for 3 hours on a Zoom meeting. Wow. We hope that you felt taken care of. We gave you a lot of information for you to make some decisions about what's useful for you and your co-teachers or future co-teachers in your context. We had a little bit of reflective time, but Rich gave you some home fun too, so you can reflect even further. We hope you share this information, stay connected. We had fun. We hope you did as well. And you know, theory is great, but if you can't turn it into actual practice, who really cares? So we hope that this information and the tools we've provided you can be helpful not only to you, but your co-teachers in the future. And we hope to see you again soon. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much. And we want to thank the folks at the SELPA for all their background support. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villa, Dr. Thousand, for joining us. And just a very quick reminder to our participants before you go, you will be receiving an email notifying you of an opportunity for you to access the recording to this webinar for 4 weeks. So you have about 4 weeks once the video is ready. for you to access it. Also, we will be sending out a survey to give us some feedback on today's presentation. Please take a couple of minutes of your time to share with us. It's very important because it informs our work and it helps us craft what is most practical and applicable to your needs. So again, thank you on behalf of Imperial County SELPA and our Senior Director, Dr. Debbie Montoya. We want to thank you so much. Take care and be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon. One more thing, we do have a coaching for co-teachers. We will have Dr. Bill and Dr. Thousand back in December the 10th. So please be aware of that, and we'll make sure that you know. And we have Debbie on board. So Debbie, some final words for our group.
I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Dr. Villa and Dr. Thousand. I know we also have them this afternoon and tomorrow for teachers. If you didn't register for that session, feel free to do so. I know every time I listen, I learn every time. So truly appreciative and inspired by their work so that we can continue to do good things for our students. So thank you so much. And thank you all who participated.
All right. Well, we enjoyed our time with you. We look forward to working with the co-teachers this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon. So take care and stay safe. And we look forward to our interactions with you, and maybe someday they can actually be face to face. All right. Bye, everybody.